The ancient sources disagree on its precise location. Some place the Graeae on the shadowed plain of Kisthene, beyond the great river Oceanus, at the furthest edge of the known world. A sunless coast where neither daylight nor moonlight reached the rocks. It was less a place that could be found on a map than a boundary, the final shore between the mortal world and the monsters waiting beyond it. The box sits at the mouth of a sea cave, grey with salt and age. 3 sets of footprints lead inside, none lead out. The tide advances across the stones, then withdraws, as though even the sea is reluctant to approach it. Long before Perseus reached Medusa, his journey brought him to 3 other women, Dino, Enyo, and Pemphredo, the Graeae, the Graeae sisters. Daughters of the ancient sea powers Phorcys and Keto, and sisters to the Gorgons. They were said to have been born old, grey-haired from their first breath, carrying the appearance of age without ever having experienced youth. Later accounts describe 3 sisters sharing between them a single eye and a single tooth. Each would use them for a time before passing them carefully into another sister's waiting hand. It is a wonderfully unsettling image. 3 faces, 1 sight, 1 voice capable of biting back, and an arrangement maintained not for days or years, but for an unnaturally long existence. The oldest surviving traditions are not entirely consistent. Hesiod names only 2 Graeae sisters and describes them as fair-cheeked rather than monstrous. Other writers give us 3 and make the shared eye and tooth central to their identity. Myth rarely arrives as one perfectly preserved story. It accumulates. One generation adds a sister, another adds an eye. Eventually, the strange detail becomes the only part anyone remembers. But the myths spend very little time considering what this shared existence might have meant. What is it like to possess sight only temporarily? To see the face of one sister while being unable to see the other? To surrender the world each time the eye leaves your hand? Perhaps they developed a rhythm. One sister watched the entrance to their distant home. One listened to the sea. The third rested in darkness, knowing her turn would come. They must have trusted one another completely. Not the sentimental trust praised in poetry, but a practical and absolute trust, the sort upon which survival depends. When you cannot see, your sister becomes your horizon. She tells you where the rocks lie. She places the tooth in your hand. She promises that the eye will return. I find that far more interesting than the usual image of 3 quarrelling hags fighting over a detachable eyeball. The shared eye is often presented as proof of their deformity, but it might also represent cooperation, refined into something almost perfect. They survived because they shared. No sister could permanently claim the eye without condemning the other 2 to darkness. Their difference required a system, and that system required restraint. Then Perseus arrived. He had been ordered to obtain the head of Medusa, the only mortal Gorgon. To complete his task, he needed information. In one familiar version, only the Graeae knew the way to the nymphs who possessed the magical objects he required. Winged sandals, a special bag in which the Gorgon's head could be carried, and the cap that would make its wearer invisible. Perseus did not ask the sisters for their assistance. He watched them. He waited. And during the brief moment when the eye belonged to none of them, when it was passing from one hand to another, he seized it. 3 ancient women were plunged into darkness. Their one means of seeing the world now rested in the hand of a stranger. Perseus refused to return it until they gave him the information he required. This is normally described as cunning, and from the hero's point of view, perhaps it was. Greek heroes were not celebrated for respecting every boundary. They were celebrated for reaching the destination, defeating the enemy, and returning with proof. The Graeae were one obstacle along the road. Their vulnerability was simply the lock Perseus discovered how to open. But I cannot help noticing how differently the story feels when told from inside the cave. The sisters had spent their entire existence trusting one another with their sight. Perseus exploited the exact moment that trust made them vulnerable. He did not overpower them. He interrupted their cooperation. That distinction matters. To him, the eye was leverage. To them, it was the world. Most versions suggest that Perseus eventually returned it after receiving his answer. Other traditions are less generous and claim that he threw it away, ensuring that the Graeae could not warn their Gorgon sisters. The disagreement is revealing. Ancient storytellers cared deeply about what Perseus needed from the Graeae. They cared much less about what happened to the women after he obtained it. Once they had served the hero's journey, the story moved on without them. That is often how myth works. The hero continues towards glory, while those he used along the road remain frozen in their final scene. History remembers Perseus as clever. It remembers Medusa as dangerous. The Graeae sisters are remembered merely as strange. Yet the Graeae may have understood something none of the heroes did. They knew that sight was not ownership. It was responsibility. The eye could never truly belong to one sister. It had to move between them again and again. Their survival depended upon accepting that possession was temporary. There is a quiet wisdom in that. We often imagine independence as the highest form of strength. One hero, one weapon, one destiny. The Graeae suggest another kind. Three beings adapting to a shared limitation. Three lives held together by patience. Not helpless, interdependent. I also wonder whether their frightening appearance protected them. At the edge of the known world, a reputation could function rather like a wall. If sailors believed terrible old women lived beyond the rocks, perhaps fewer ships would approach. Perhaps monster was not merely an insult. Perhaps it was armor. But armor only works until someone decides the creature wearing it has no rights at all. The tide reaches the box. The water divides around it without touching the wood. From inside the cave comes a faint sound, not a cry, something smaller, an object being placed carefully into an open hand. The box remains closed. What was inside was never simply three hags crouched at the edge of the world. It was an agreement, a system of trust maintained across centuries. Three sisters who understood that none of them could possess everything, but together they could see. And then came a hero who recognized their difference, not as a life they had learned to share, but as a weakness he was entitled to exploit. Perhaps that is the uncomfortable question the myth leaves behind. When history calls someone clever, should we also ask who was required to become helpless for that cleverness to succeed? The tide begins to retreat. For one brief moment, something catches the light inside the cave. An eye, perhaps, moving gently from one sister's hand to another. That's what was inside the box.